Recording, so when you're ready, if you want to start the housekeeping.
Great,
Yeah.
okay, we're ready.
We're ready to go now. Yeah, lovely, thanks. Thanks, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee. Before we start, I've got some housekeeping to go through. So can I remind everybody present that this remote meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and that this recording is being archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in person if sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function online, but I think we're all online tonight. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak, please could they turn on their camera or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair and/or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic Officer know. So please can I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, public speakers, Vale residents, and also to anyone watching the live meeting broadcast. We'll move straight on to the agenda and begin with apologies for absence. So now we've got some from Councillor Lloyd-Selby and Councillor Penn. Do we have any others, Mark?
So far, they were the only two I had as well, Vice Chair. So if obviously members want to speak now, they can let us know if there's any other apologies.
Thank you. Has anyone got any apologies? Councillor Hooper?
Apologies.
Thanks, Chair. Just to give...
No, sorry, Councillor.
Give apologies for Stefan William.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies, Councillor.
Give apologies for Stefan William.
Yeah, apologies, Councillor Hooper. I know you did inform us beforehand. I should have added him. So thanks for that.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. So we'll move on now to declarations of interest. Does anybody have any? Councillor Hooper, is it an old hand, or do you have a declaration? Councillor Hooper? Oh, okay. So in that case, then we'll now go on to agenda item 3, which is the reference from Cabinet on the initial budget 2025-26 and medium-term financial plan 25-26 to 2029-30 proposals for consultation. To take us through this, we've got Gemma Jones, Operational Manager for Accountancy. So I'll hand over to Gemma, who is presenting a short presentation, I think. The relevant EIAs have been shared with members in advance this afternoon and should be published online if appropriate. Gemma.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm hoping Gareth or Mark will be able to share my slides for me. Thank you very much. And apologies for members who've seen these slides before, but very quickly to run through the context of the 25-26 budget proposals and medium-term financial plan. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. And again, please, thank you. So members will recall that a financial strategy setting out the rolled forward budget for 25-26 and the medium-term financial plan was brought back in July, and the budget has been developed alongside the corporate plan that members would have been cited on, and an updated reshaping programme. So budget's obviously been informed by the Chancellor's budget that was set back in October, and the medium-term financial plan refresh was brought on that basis back in November. There was a significant underlying cost pressure of 34 million, and we had a residual gap of around 14.7 million at that time. Following that, we did receive the Welsh Government settlement, and there are a number of in-year allocations for, particularly for pay and for teachers' pensions. And across Wales, there is a 4.3% average settlement. So if we go on to the next slide, please. The Vale was slightly at the lower end of that, so it received 3.3%, which was just short of 7.4 million. But that was significantly more than had been factored into the November report. I think it's really important that we understand where Welsh Government are showing those increases, because there was significant increases across the schools and social services SSAs, which of course are kind of the building blocks of how Welsh Government constructs the formula by which it allocates out the funding. And also fire increased by just over 12%, but there was very little increase across the other service blocks. So that's obviously the assumptions that Welsh Government have applied when allocating at that funding. We have had a number of grant announcements in the background as well, which obviously are informing our the settlement the provisional budget that's come before you, but also will be informing our final proposals and our revenue monitoring in 24-25. If we go on to the next slide, please. So this just sets out some of the kind of economic context of the budget, and obviously some of these figures are a little bit outdated now. They were pulled together at the time of the medium-term financial plan refresh. I think obviously we've had the recent Monetary Policy Committee update, and I think prospects for economic recovery remain quite limited. So that's important because it will inform some of our assumptions around public sector settlements going forward, but also some of our assumptions around public sector pay and other inflationary pressures as well. If we go on to the next slide, please. So in terms of the initial budget that's been brought forward for consultation, it set out an overall budget gap of just over 8 million after taking into account some of those grant transfers in, and also a 3.3% increase for 25-26. So this budget models council tax at 6.9%, but it also builds in some additional council tax funding, allowing for tax-based growth. It makes some provision for council tax arrears. We've been making quite good progress in recent years around council tax arrears, and also some additional assumptions around additional funding generated as a result of a single person discount review in the council tax space. We have accommodated, as part of the proposals, just over 29 million, but there is obviously still an £11 million gap between those cost pressures that were put forward and the pressures that are being reflected in the proposals. And in terms of how we've closed that £8 million gap, there's a savings programme of around 9 million, and that's partly because we do have to reverse some of the savings that were put in as temporary savings in previous years. And that's mainly where we've put in temporary savings around use of reserves to reduce the cost of external borrowing and generate investment income. Obviously, as our reserves reduce, our ability to do that is limited. Fees and charges were set out in the initial report for consultation. They've generally been increased by 3%, but there are some notable exceptions which are highlighted in the report. And there are reserve projections that are reflected in the initial proposals, but a more intensive review of reserves to align them with kind of risks and the corporate plan and reshaping priorities is being undertaken to inform the final proposals and also feed into that statement that the Section 151 officer is required to do as part of their confirmation that the council's budget is sustainable. If we go on to the next slide, please. So this just sets out that overall position for the council with the £8 million overall gap. And you can see a significant amount of those pressures relate to inflation and particularly pay inflation as well. And over the medium-term financial plan, you'll see those pressures reducing slightly. And that's partly because our kind of pay assumptions are far more conservative over the medium-term financial plan, but also because, as we see every year as part of the budget cycle, our we have lots of emerging pressures the closer we get to a financial year. So we've done our best to build in some kind of prudent pressures across the medium-term financial plan, but we need to do some more intensive work around that going forward. If we go on to the next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Colin, and he's going to run through a little bit of the detail around cost pressures for neighbourhood services. I suppose relevant to this scrutiny committee would be the highways repairs and the ash dieback. So Colin, are you able just to talk through some of those pressures for me briefly? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gemma, and good evening, Chair, and good evening, members. So the first one on the top line, the waste contractual inflation and new developments, there's no adjustments in for next year, but then subsequently in latter years, there's 75 attributed to those inflations. So that will be pressures on our existing contracts for waste disposal, waste treatment, and for the large developments that will be coming on board. And I'll take you down to the highways repairs. So then there's increased cost of footway and carriageway repairs due to continued underfunding the highway and footway resurfacing extra. So that's 500,000 in for next year, and that is a pressurised budget. This year we're predicting around £1 million overspend. So that is a significant pressured area. But we are hoping to capture additional capital funding from Welsh Government that will increase our resurfacing budget to around £5 million for the next 2 continuous years, which will help hopefully reduce our maintenance costs. And then the ash dieback, members will be aware of the current problems with ash dieback and the demands on the team to continue with maintaining and taking down trees where they are dangerous, and that largely supports that service. Okay, Jem?
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Colin. And just to note that obviously we have been funding ash dieback in previous years from a reserve, but that reserve is now pretty much spent. So from it's more sustainable, obviously, to build that requirement in the base budget. If you go on to the next slide, please. So then this sets out some of the pressures within place. The predominant pressure in the place budget is in respect of the pay award. That's the amount that we're looking to fund for 25-26. But there is a short pressure in 26-27 that looks to be reversed out in 27-28 around the regional local development plan. Marcus, I don't know whether you want to come in on that at all, or just to briefly provide a bit of detail around that.
Yes, Gemma. Oh, yes, Gemma. Can you hear me?
Yes. Right.
Yeah, the regional local development plan is, or it should be referred to as strategic development plan, is a. Oh, hang on a second. This is the, sorry, this is not the regional, this is the replacement local development plan. So it should be the, it should be replacement local development plan. As part of the development of the replacement local development plan, we do expect to have to undertake a public inquiry. That will cost us, we have to employ the inspector and pay the inspector's wages, along with an inspector's assistant. So that last time around for the UDP, or the last local development plan cost around about £100,000. We have budgeted for £150,000 in 26-7 when we expect the public inquiry to take place for the replacement local development plan.
Brilliant, thank you, Marcus, and we'll get that changed for the final proposals. Okay, thank you. If you go into the next slide, please. So this kind of sets out the kind of overall council position for saving. So I think there's really an ambition when accepting that we obviously needed to, again, find significant savings to balance the budget going forward, that we would increase the proportion of reshaping proposals that were put forward as part of this budget. And that's clearly in part because it's impossible to sustain kind of that level of tactical savings would be, consistently salami slicing budgets, and a need towards working towards that target operating model that the council will need to be by 2030, as outlined in the reshaping programme. Obviously, it's encouraging that reshaping proposals totaled 4 million, which is a significantly higher proportion than we had as part of the 24-25 budget, and some reshaping proposals sketched out for 26-27. There are also a number of reshaping proposals that were at far more of a draft stage that were discussed as part of the budget working group too, that we'll be considering to feed into that some of the detail around how we will address the budgetary gap over the medium-term financial plan, which will be feeding into the final budget proposals that will be coming forward. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and I'm hoping Colin won't mind coming in again just to go through the detail of some of the savings proposals that are outlined for neighbourhood services.
Okay, thanks, Jem. Okay, I'll take you through the neighbourhood services proposals, and you'll know these are quite substantial. The values that are proposed to almost the tune of 2.5 million, so they're not without challenge. But we do have a clear plan how we're going to deliver this, with largely a mix of efficiencies and by raising additional income. So the first one at the top line is a restructure of neighbourhood services management, £100,000. So the idea is to operate with a lower senior management structure as possible and to reduce some of those costs and overheads so we can focus on service delivery. Second line is street cleansing. So this is kind of the same narrative that was included in the budget proposals for 2024-25. So it's to reduce litter bins by a further 25% and reduce service standards and cleaning across the Vale. But this will be subject to a reshaping programme which has just commenced, and we're working with the corporate transformation team and our existing workforce, who provide usually the better of ideas. They're the ones that provide the service. They know what happens on the ground. So together there will be a joined up approach to reduce our costs by 200,000. Again, that's going to be very challenging. We've not quite made all the savings in the budget for last year. And I know that's a very sensitive issue around the bin provision in our community. But we have a clear plan, and we hope that we can achieve that saving and still maintain a reasonably good standard of service. The third line is attached to the street cleansing, that's to reduce our service standards across resorts by £50,000. And how we would do that, we would look at the seasonal staff engaged over the summer, and we would try to build in efficiencies around that. Again, that's subject to a reshaping programme. So we will look at our patterns of work and peak periods, reduce kind of staffing levels as a norm instead of bringing in staff numbers for 6 months continuously. We will look at peak periods and have a gold, silver and bronze service. So we would anticipate and look at the weathers and demands in advance on a weekly basis. And if we have periods of prolonged good sunshine, we will bring in the additional resources required. But if we have prolonged spells of rain, etc., then we will keep a reduced resources wherever possible to make that savings. Then we've got the parks. So we've got an alternative delivery model for parks and open spaces. That's £270,000 of savings. It's around about a £2 million service. So again, that is subject to reshaping, and we've started that work, very early stages, but we have started that work already, and that will involve the existing team, the corporate transformation team, and using our workforce for other alternative ideas, and comes up with alternative ways of working. You probably notice, or members will have noticed already, some changes in our parks areas, and there's no plans for bedding plants and things like that this year, although we will supplement that with additional tree planting and wildflower areas. The next one is waste management, resource reduction, staffing and vehicles. So we've highlighted efficiencies in the service with mobile vehicles, and if that saving is approved, we've largely planned that already to commence very promptly in April. There's a winter maintenance saving of 15,000, and that's purely down to a review of routes and resources and efficiencies using new technology. The car park, the permanent closure of Court Road car park, that's remaining in the budget. And members obviously be fully aware that 2 weeks ago we had a very a good session at scrutiny debating that. And transport fleet efficiencies is 50,000. I know largely members may think that 50,000 is quite light considering the size of the council's fleet, but some of the services efficiencies coming from the street cleansing, the waste teams and the parks teams, etc., includes vehicles. So we'd be careful not to double count that saving. And then we've got fees and charges to increase full cost recoveries or 3% across our fees and charges. And I know members, some members have queried the fees and the charges approach with me directly, particularly in the front line of neighbourhood services, just to understand why there's 3% charge and larger significant increases in other areas. And that's so we can either cost recovery or have a basic 3% on cost on general other service areas. And then waste management, increase income for garden waste subscriptions, although that's probably not going to be quite achievable for the 140,000 this year because of a timing issue. We were keen to get the garden waste subscription service selling as soon as possible, and that's out at the moment. It went out approximately 2 weeks ago, so we are selling at 2024-25 prices. So there's an option to grab a bargain at the moment, and there will be some, I guess, inflationary charge on the existing up to 8 bags and unlimited services, all for consideration at the moment. So that is unlikely that we'll probably capture the 140,000 savings on that. So that will need to be reviewed. We have Gemma's next slide, please. And then increased market share for commercial waste. So we are mobilising at the moment additional resources to go out and capture in our communities and businesses more commercial waste share of the market, if you like. So we went out selling a new service last year when the regulations changed, the new workplace recycling regulations were introduced. So that effectively means businesses have to separate their waste and they can't mix it like a commingled service. So we did actually go out and we tried to increase our market share, but not really enough. Probably because a lot of businesses were tied up with longer term contracts and we weren't quite set up for the bulk collections, which we have kind of modelled our service around a little bit more for the future. And we are looking at split back body vehicles, etc., so we can expand in this service area. But we do need somebody out selling the service, so that's what that £50,000 is. And then car park income at coastal locations, that's the 320,000 that was debated at the last special committee meeting. And then highway construction is income from capital projects. So this is our major construction team that delivers Section 106 money and large projects. So the 50,000 is the return from their managing schemes. And then we've got highway development. So these are the new developments undertaken. These are the 190,000 is consistent with what we bought in income this year from property developers. And enforcement, the new camera car and increased enforcement opportunities. So there's £225,000 attributed to the new car, and also a plan to bring in new or additional enforcement officers. And we recognise there are gaps with some of the existing enforcement at the moment, particularly in car parking areas and with environmental crime, etc. There's waste income at £400,000, and that's an anticipation of the extended producer responsibility scheme. New legislation has come in, putting a duty on producer pays principle, and that is income that we're anticipating later on in 2025. And then community centres, to declare them surplus or consider for community asset transfers, 50,000. Doesn't seem a lot of revenue costs, but that's probably half of what is a realistic saving. But it's not without challenges, because if there are leases already, long-term leases with community centres and groups, we are unable to declare them surplus anyway. So the likelihood that the community centres will feature part of the community asset transfer work that is planned for buildings and reshaping. And lifeguard buildings, again, declaring the building surplus at 10,000. Again, that seems really low revenue value, but what we struggle with is maintaining the buildings, and it does take a lot of capital money to maintain them. So these are largely buildings that are coastal locations that are kind of used for groups who are bringing on what are called nippers and training youngsters to be lifeguards and give them coastal awareness. They're really good initiatives, but what they don't do is provide lifeguarding services at those buildings. So the RNLI we engage to provide beach lifeguarding services. They bring their own units and portable buildings with them for that service. So we would look to do community asset transfers within the community, and that would mean probably these groups, and a couple are willing to go that way. We've already spoken early days, but we have spoken to some of the groups who manage the lifeguard building community groups, and they would be interested in some community asset transfers, and they would probably be able to access grants that we couldn't to help maintain those buildings and not improve or enhance them. And then we've got concessions to increase additional concessions across neighbourhood assets, 25,000. And we've indicated there are possible options at Alexander Park, Victoria Park, over on the Nap, Gladstone Gardens, etc., just to name a few. So we would increase our opportunity to bring in additional income. And then the last one is community asset transfers Vale-wide, so where we have got other opportunities to transfer assets such as sports pavilions or sports buildings, etc. Again, that is largely attributed to the community asset transfers. So hopefully members can see that it's largely a mix of efficiencies and bringing in income. We do have a lot of limitations in how we can deliver savings, and you can see that the bottom figure, well, is actually 2.3 million. It's slightly less on the anticipated 2.5 million, which is not without challenge. We have statutory duties we have to carry out, and in some areas of specialist areas such as draining, coastal, engineering, we are so under-resourced, there's very little savings we can kind of capture. And we also, a lot of that, we have large budget, as members will be aware, but we have a lot of contractual obligations such as leisure centre contracts, the money we invest in road resurfacing, bus services, waste disposal and other treatments, just to name a few, which we largely can't kind of capture savings from. And hopefully you've noted that we've not anticipated closing public conveniences or taking further savings in that capacity, but they're not without challenge, that's for sure. And as a new head of service in this area, I would have suggested such efficiencies and considerations anyway. I guess we do want to have a lower tiers of supervisory and management positions, so we can kind of focus as much resource on providing frontline services as possible. And the way we'll capture that through those reshaping projects is through agile and mobile working and introducing more use of technology. It just simply isn't going to be possible to carry on and be sustainable providing services as we do now, unfortunately. But we will look to be and coordinate more effectively with these new initiatives. And just to name a few things like Adopt a Street or coordinate the work of our partners in Keep Wales Tidy, youth offending, probation services, etc. And all the groups that do so much valued work within our communities, and our longer term strategy will be about engaging, employing less supervisors in the long term and managers, and having more officers who are going to be more tend to be on the front line of engaging with our community and coordinating work rather than providing it. So it'll be a bit of a hybrid operation. Okay, thanks members and Chair. I'll hand back to Jem.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Colin. And just to kind of build on what Colin said, obviously these budget proposals were published at a moment in time, and for the final proposals, we'll obviously be taking on board the feedback from consultation, but also further work that's been undertaken within service areas to assess the deliverability of some of these savings proposals as well. So I think, as Colin outlined, obviously some of the savings, such as the community centre savings, are slightly more complicated than perhaps initially thought. So it might be that as an example, needs to be looked at further in terms of where that's profiled in the medium-term financial plan. Marcus, I'm hoping also to hand over to you to run through the place savings, if that's okay. Thank you.
That's fine, Gemma. Yeah. Hopefully you can all hear me. The regeneration and place savings, you can see from the list here, we have a vacant post review. That is the loss of a post that hasn't been filled. We have a number here which are focusing on income from business support and some of our buildings which we are leasing out to businesses. So some of those are subject to lease reviews, and we will be hoping to raise the value of the lease to the various businesses who are operating there in line with the commercial rent. Those reviews run roughly around about every 5 years, and so we are due reviews on a number of them. You'll notice that there's also reference to income from commercial leases. That is in respect to some of our country park operators whose leases are also coming to up for renewal. We are expecting a Welsh Government to increase planning fees. We don't actually increase the fees for planning applications, but Welsh Government have indicated they are looking to increase to a fee recovery model. That means that we are expecting a significant increase in planning fees, although we do not expect that until the summer of this year at least. Obviously what we have done is put a substantial sum of £70,000 in to cover that. I'm expecting it to be more, but obviously that is a cautious figure in light of the fact it's probably going to be roughly somewhere between 10 and maybe half a year's increase in income. There are new planning income opportunities and products which we're hoping to launch around pre-application inquiries and charging for that service. And there's a figure attached to that, which is an income service. We'll also be raising some of the other areas where we can raise the fees, which includes building control, so that we can get closer to a cost recovery model. There is reference in there for 26/7 to looking at public rights of way regionalisation and working with some of our partners, partner authorities, to reduce our costs around public rights of way. We are already working with partner authorities in respect of the Great Glamorgan Way project, and we're hoping we can take that work forward and further lower our costs. And then finally, we've got the further commercialisation and income opportunities from leisure opportunities in the country parks. We would like to move towards a cost recovery model for our country parks, as they are very close actually now, given the amount of income we get from various grants and other opportunities. And so there are some considerable opportunities around areas of both Portkerry and Cosmoston, where we have in the past looked at leisure activities in the parks themselves. Those opportunities are arising again, and we have had interest from operators. We are hoping that we will be able to further improve the leisure offer around the country parks. So, Gemma, that is all the savings for place.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Marcus. If we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this slide just attempts to set out then, I think in the report we've got this narrative of how we've been directing as much funding as possible to schools and social services. And obviously that has a knock-on effect, I suppose, on the other services that the council offers, notably the services covered by this scrutiny committee. So having taken into account the savings, so significant savings targets still allocated towards schools and social services. So I'm just going to stand up to turn the light on, Maru. So 1.2 million savings being targeted at schools and 3.6 million at social services, but around 3.7 million against other services. And obviously we ran through the 2.3 million targeted at neighbourhood services and a further savings target within place. So we're seeing, around 7.5% across learning skills and schools. Social services increase of just short of 11%. Overall increase of the council of around 7.3%. So taking into account some of that transfers for pay and pensions relating to 24-25, and then the 3.3% uplift for Welsh Government settlements, but a 2.81% increase for other services. And obviously that does include things like the fire levy and council tax reduction, where we have probably percentages over and above that. So that probably slightly distorts the position for neighbourhood services and place. If we go on to the next slide, please. So in terms of reserves, as I said, we've done a kind of roll forward based on current projections, and obviously quite significant use to offset the in-year revenue position in 24-25. Further work is ongoing to feed into the final proposals, attempting to have a slightly more strategic kind of risk-informed approach to reserves that will be set out in the final proposals. But broadly, a reduction in reserves expected, but obviously as the reserves available reduce, it's really important we get those assumptions around deliverability of savings and making sure that we're directing funding appropriately to cost pressures, and that those budgets are deliverable, because we won't have the flexibility to draw down from reserves in the same way. And if we go on to the next slide, please. And this just sets out the response to the Welsh Government consultation. So I think typically we've responded as part of a group in the past, but really felt it was important to respond this year, specifically highlighting some areas. So some of the pressures and how far adrift of we are of the overall Welsh local authority pressures across Wales in terms of the provisional settlement, the disparity between local authority funding. So some local authorities experiencing up to 5.6% in terms of settlement, and often that's largely driven by some of the increases in population, etc. But requesting a floor is considered in the settlement, and also just highlighting some of our particular concerns around the way the Welsh Government formulas work, particularly in respect of social care, and some of those concerns are around the data used for older persons, which impacts the Vale, and also in schools where we've got some issues with the way the ALN data in particular is calculated based on deprivation. If you go on to the next slide, please. So this is the ask for scrutiny tonight. So thank you very much for bearing with me on quite a lot of PowerPoint slides. But just in terms of any comments on our overall approach to budget setting this year, any queries or concerns in respect of cost pressures, similarly around savings, and then of course if there are any alternative ideas that committee would like to see us explore. In terms of the timelines, they're set out on the next slide. So we're, if you go on to the next slide, please, sorry. So we're working towards, oh no, that's fine. We're working towards timelines of setting council tax by the statutory deadline, which is the 11th of March. So working towards Cabinet on the 6th of March. We're hoping to get the Welsh Government final settlement around the 20th of February, and then we'll be feeding into that final council report on the 10th. Okay, thank you ever so much for bearing with me. Happy to take any questions on the report.
That's great. Thank you, Gemma, and thanks Colin and Marcus as well. So Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. A question for Colin, actually. Thank you, Colin, for a very good report. You've obviously all worked very hard on this, but I'm a bit concerned about the parks. You're saying about cutting the budget for parks. Will this mean redundancies or what have you, or redeployment of any of the staff?
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Well, we're still doing the reshaping work at the moment, but in most of our service areas, so the waste savings, the cleansing savings and the park savings, we do or have retained a lot of agency staff, and we've put a freeze on all appointments as staff have left us or retired for a number of years now, and we are aiming to try and not affect any permanent worker, if that is possible. But that reshaping work has just started, and I guess I can't give you a definitive answer until that reshaping work is finished in approximately 1 to 2 months.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any follow-up, Councillor Norman? No. Okay. Councillor Hooper.
Thanks. Thanks, Vice Chair. Sorry, my signal seems to be quite poor, so I can't hear you. I can hear other people quite well, and if you can't hear me very well, I apologise for the signal. But I've got a couple of points to make, if I can, Chair. The first thing is it seems that we've clearly got all the baked-in savings from the car park and charges that this committee spent a lot of time only at our last meeting discussing, and if the Mayor had got had not been told to change his vote, we might have had a different opinion, and these have been pushed back in their entirety to Cabinet. But I think there's a real issue when the political hits that this council clearly are going to take over them are one thing, but the commercial hits that the trade has told us about, I think, is something that we should really still reflect on. £320,000 extra income on the resorts when there may be businesses that are closed down. I think who's absorbing that, I think, really needs still to be considered. Court Road car park still on there as being closed. We know that the data that was used for that was poor. We had people come in and tell the data was different and poor, and yet this still sits in there as part of the proposals. I think this is clear that we're at the sharp end of governments. We've changed government. We've got a Westminster government giving money, the Senate giving money to the councils, and the councils have been insufficient. That last phrase, there's not enough money, and the social care and schools, we don't match the needs. I think it's really stark and something that shows that this system is broken. I've got a couple of questions that I'd like a bit more information on as well. It seems we have, I'd be interested in the leisure areas that Marcus references earlier, that he'll be getting increased commercial revenues from. It seemed that there was no detail. Well, there was no detail there. Really interested in what those could be, because if we just see these as being cash cows, I think that's concerning. We've also got, at the same time, we'll be looking at trying to increase revenues from those people who are operating these facilities. And as we heard at the last meeting, one of the operators at Cosmoston had already noticed a 20% decrease, consistent decrease in their trade since the car parking charges were introduced. So these things are coming one on top of the other. I think the last thing that really, really concerns me is the community assets that are being considered for sold off, transferred, or closed. And I think this is a real declinist, miserablest situation where we've got, we're clearly, as I said before, at the sharp end of government priorities or non-priorities. And we're asking, it seems, big society to solve the problem that the council can't fund. The Cameron project that was, just didn't work when he put it forward and won't work now. And it just seems that this whole budget is something that shows that this council clearly doesn't consider what it wants from traders and others. And we're just going to see a continued decline in our town. So I'm personally hugely disappointed by this. I feel like the Cabinet hasn't listened, and we're in a situation now where we're just going to be in permanent decline. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. But Gemma, did you want to come in on any of that?
Very briefly, Chair. Just a kind of process clarification. Obviously, Councillor Hooper referenced the inclusion of the car parking savings still being in these proposals, and obviously this report is a reference, so it predates that scrutiny committee. So it is unchanged from that original cabinet report in January that predates the committee. Obviously, the recommendations of the previous scrutiny committee will be going to cabinet for consideration, and as I referenced briefly when touching on the savings, further consideration of the savings in the context of the consultation will be made prior to the final budget proposals. Just to also briefly say, not to say that there's absolutely no case in terms of some of Councillor Hooper's commentary, but obviously we have seen some really positive asset transfers, perhaps not corporate asset transfers, but some asset transfers and long leases in that space, and obviously some of those organisations have been able to access grant funding and invest in those assets significantly above and beyond what the council would have been able to access, and so sometimes that has had a positive outcome. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma. I was going to actually go back to, I think my glasses are a bit wonky here. I was going to go back to that comment that Councillor Hooper made about community asset transfers and actually disagree. I think we can look at these things negatively and as a race to the bottom, but if you really want to, when you think about a community asset transfer, that can be a very positive thing. And the organisations who may take over these buildings may have and may do so with more imagination for their use and make them thrive. So I actually disagree that can be a very positive thing. My next question is really to do with an additional 25% of our bins to be removed. What I would like us to do, if that's possible, to review the position we find ourselves in now, and particularly with reference to our seaside tourist towns, because we may have a very different period during the summer where tourists will come in and the remaining bins will just not be enough. I had an email from one of our residents this week expressing concern just with the levels of litter. We're very, very lucky in this ward of St Bride's that we have regular volunteer litter picking. We've done a few projects with Keep Wells Tidy. So part of this is just to do with people coming through the village and throwing rubbish out of their cars as they go past. No amount of bins would change that behaviour. But I'm wondering if we can, as I said, pause where we are before we remove more, and also consider for our tourist areas if we can have an education piece during those summer months to encourage, especially with the children and with our beaches, so that we don't get more plastic going into the sea. But thank you, and thanks for your work.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. Gemma or Colin, did you want to come in on any of those at all?
Yeah, thanks, yeah. Can I come in on the points that Councillor Prothero made? I think there is an intention to take stock of, after the first phase of removal of 25% of litter bins, we will take stock, see what complaints we have, see what concerns are raised. They are under review all the time, and if there is genuinely concerns that need to be raised, then we will ensure our team are undertaking litter surveys and will review where we've removed bins, and that will always be the case. And yeah, I agree, we need to take stock where we are, see what the implications are before we move on forward. And in terms of our resorts, directly on the resorts, there's actually no plans to remove those bins at all. We will need that capacity when we have visitors, and they are some of the most important bins we have. The target on the 25%, there, just to clarify, really are duplications of bins, those in housing estates, and those that are abused, and they were identified by our workforce as the significant abused bins, if you like, that we have, that we're struggling to maintain. So there is an opportunity to see what the implications are after we complete the exercise, which is likely to take about another 2 to 3 weeks, and then it'll be concluded, and then we'll take stock and see how that has impacted in our communities. And then once that is done, there is an intention in April to do a litter campaign and do communications from the corporate teams, and that is all about advice on litter and, for example, back to basics, that if you don't see a litter bin, you carry your waste and you take it home with you if need be. But we will run that campaign, and we will speak to Keep Wales Tidy and have a kind of a joined up approach to that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Brotherhood, did you want to come back on any of that?
That's great, Colin. And I'd really appreciate if we can consider an education campaign for our beaches. I know lots of local authorities, coastal local authorities, have taken up this mantle, and there's some wonderful creative works of art that are also bins that is encouraging children and other visitors to fill their rubbish instead of letting it go in the sea. But thank you.
Well, thank you. Councillor Ernest?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My first point, I think, is the value of neighbourhood services that our residents put on them. Every year, we decrease the amount of money we give to neighbourhood services. It reduces. And even when I was a councillor 10 years or so ago on the Vale, we were doing exactly the same thing at that time, reducing services and reducing the amount of money. We got rid of flower displays, floral displays, town centre, floral displays, and so on and so forth. But the fact is, Vice Chairman, that our public, the people who pay council tax to us, actually appreciate those services, but they're not going to get them. So they're going to be paying an increase of 6.9% on council tax, whilst having a great reduction in services. And to me, at any rate, that doesn't really seem sort of particularly acceptable. We know also, Chairman, that social services and schools always overspend their budget. They always have done. They always do. A few schools have got some money in reserves, but most of our larger schools overspend. Social services overspend year after year after year, and we pour money into the service to support it. That's not to say that the good people who come to social services shouldn't be looked after, but I think we need to consider sometimes the amount of money that some of the social services provision we make are just over the top. The weekly cost, for example, of looking after children and so on, running into thousands and thousands of pounds. And lastly, Chairman, and I'll keep quiet after this, our community centres. I well remember a few years back a well-known community centre in Barry that nearly folded because the council asked them to take on the management of it, but they just found that there were insufficient volunteers. They had a water bill that had run up thousands of pounds because of an unknown leak, and nobody had able to pick that up. And so the council had come in and bail out the community centres. But what we forget, Chairman, is these provide a home for so many voluntary organisations, whether it be yoga or Tai Chi or children's classes or kids' birthdays. They're invaluable in the community. And I'm not sure these days that with all the responsibilities on management of community centres, that we would be able to get the volunteers to keep them going. We've got, 22, 23, I think the figure is in the Vale. That's a lot of estate. And I understand the service wishing to pass them out, but will they be able to survive under the new setup? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Colin O'Donnell, was there anything you wanted to respond to there?
Just briefly, Chair. I mean, I think some of the consideration around the community centres is that the other organisations might be able to access grant funding to enable them to invest in the premises, which is obviously something that we struggle with as an authority, prioritising things like resurfacing roads and keeping schools open. Just to come back on Councillor Ernest's point on some of the additional costs within social services and schools. And I think some of that rationale is around targeting some of those reshaping targets within those services, because clearly there is a point, isn't there, where you could continue to make savings across the residual services. And if the pressures persist and they aren't reshaped and transformed, ultimately you get to a tipping point where the residual services are have been cut to such an extent that they're not deliverable. So that's absolutely why there are reshaping proposals and some quite significant ones targeted within social services and education as part of these budget proposals.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to call on Cabinet Member and Leader Elizabeth, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back in on that, apart from the fact this is environment and regeneration scrutiny. So I wouldn't be expecting to have social services and schools discussed here. But what I will say is that the scale and complexity of need, both within social care and in education, is well documented, not only across Wales, but across the UK. When you actually look at some of the costs, I mean, one thing, we're talking about reshaping. Much is talked about people being stuck in hospital for a long period of time, and yet this council can discharge people to home with support in an average of 3 days, the best performance in Wales. That comes with a cost, but what cost? If this is a frail elderly person, do we want them to stay in hospital, or would we prefer them at home? Similarly with schools, the rise in additional learning needs has been exponential, but these are our children, and we have a duty of care to them. It makes life difficult, doesn't it? But really, if you want to reduce council tax by cutting support to frail elderly people and children, then you can make a recommendation to that extent. In terms of community centres, what I would say is that we will be open to asset transfers. There are some really brilliant community centres that even at this stage would absolutely thrive by managing their own community centre, in the same way as we've seen some superb community libraries form. It's always difficult at the start, but we are looking to provide support for people to be the bedrock of their own communities. So, actually this is something I think is hugely exciting going forward. And also there has been mention about country parks, green and blue spaces. Actually, an awful lot of people in the placemaking work have told us that they have different views on how their leisure should be spent. And we want to do a piece of work around green and blue space to make sure that what we provide is what our residents want. If those opportunities are commercial, then that will be very welcome to help our country parks or other spaces to become commercially to be sustainable and cost neutral. So thank you, Chair. Just wanted to clarify a few of those points.
That's great, thank you, Leader. Okay, so then what would be enough this evening is that the revised spending and assumptions along with the draft reshaping proposals be approved, with the view that this will go back to the Corporate Performance and Resources Committee. So we can do that, but in following the sort of recommendations or proposals that we've made just on this point, we've got Councillor Hooper wanting to address the car parking charges, the comments sort of that we raised at the last meeting, would like that to be attached again to this discussion. And also Councillor Prothero's point that we'd like an education piece done and see what work can be done to address littering ahead of the summer. If I've missed anything, then let me know, but otherwise are we happy just to propose those to go?
Sorry, Vice Chair, can I just double check what you were proposing in terms of the car parking charges? Sorry.
And so Councillor Hooper mentioned the fact that the budget that we're looking at, the proposals that we're looking at this evening, were obviously written before we had that scrutiny meeting. And if the comments from this evening are going to corporate performance, again, just to sort of echo what was raised at the last meeting.
Okay, if yourself and the committee are happy to put that in, about the points that were raised at the previous meeting, is that correct? And just to reinforce the points from those?
Yeah, that's what I took and asked Councillor Hooper meant otherwise. Councillor Ernest, do you want your hand up?
Yes, I'm happy to support Councillor Hooper on that. I think he's raised a very good point, and I didn't touch on it in my comments because he had done very well. So I'm happy to support Councillor Hooper on the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, so then committee happy with that sort of summary as the proposal that we would like to forward to corporate performance and resources? Councillor Prothero? Oh, Mark? Councillor Drake?
I thought you were asking for somebody to move it.
Well, a seconder will do if people are happy with that. Yeah.
I'll second it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So in that case, are people happy to note the report?
Okay. Sorry, Chair, just to double check. So is the proposals from Councillor Hooper, was there something from Councillor Prothero as well? You wanted to go back to CPR as well?
Yeah, so the possibility of doing some sort of educational piece in advance of the summer on littering and the review of the bins after the 25% removal.
Yeah, okay. Again, if committee are happy with that, they can go back to CPR and then on to Cabinet if it's decided.
Okay, is there a second for that then, please? Councillor Norman? No? Okay, yeah, Councillor Norman?
Chair, Vice Chair, I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Pam. Okay, so in that case, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. So we'll head over to agenda item 4, which concerns the draft capital programme proposal 25-26. And I think Gemma has another presentation for us.
I do, thank you, Chair. Far fewer slides on this one. If Mark or Gareth could share the slides, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, not to worry. I'll just start talking through the slides.
Yeah. Bear with us, Gemma. We're just trying to get the slides up.
No problem. So obviously this report just sets out the capital programme proposals 25-26 to 29-30. And I think what we're trying to do to a certain extent as part of the programme is build on some of the rationale from last year. I'm sorry, someone's trying to call me. I'm just going to cancel that. Right, okay, sorry, apologies. Some of the rationale last financial year, which was to be directing some of that funding to the council's statutory obligations. So it's trying to maximise some of the funding that goes towards maintaining things like resurfacing the road. So some of that rationale was set out as part of the budget proposals last financial year. In terms of the capital settlement, there was more funding than had been initially expected So the amount awarded to the council for 25-26 was 7.6 million. So that was an increase of 620,000 over and above the 24-25 general capital funding. And it is quite an ambitious 5-year programme. So spend of around 82 million in 25-26 and just short of 400 million over the 5 years. Obviously, a significant element of that funding is around the housing improvement programme and sustainable communities for learning schemes. So significant funding from specific grants, but there is also some use of unsupported borrowing. And in terms of the process, capital bids were shortlisted by the Strategic Insight Board in October. And then once the provisional capital assessment received, new schemes were proposed to be included into the capital programme. So the capital programme is set out within the appendices to the report. There are a number of pipeline schemes, and just to clarify, those pipeline schemes are there while the business cases are being worked up. And once those business cases are approved, they are promoted to the main programme. Significant funding, as I say, from grants and contributions, but also around £22 million of unsupported borrowing in 25-26 as part of these proposals, and 11 million of reserves, as well as 4 million from capital receipts in 25-26. In terms of some of the additional bids that are proposed to be included within the 5-year programme in relation to this scrutiny committee, we have the inclusion of a rolling programme for street lighting LED replacement. It's certainly not as much as would be needed, but it certainly provides some base funding that can be built upon within the programme. There is some additional funding to progress the Penarth Marina Landslip scheme, and that's a significant scheme. So an additional 540,000 has been requested there. And then finally, relevant to this scrutiny committee is the fleet parking scheme. An additional 2.4... Sorry, hopefully you can still hear me. An additional 2.4 million has been built in there. And there are some significant benefits from progressing that scheme. So obviously it reduces some of the driving time. So there are benefits in terms of fuel. It enables us to consider to have those waste vehicles sited next to the household waste recycling centre. So it reduces some of that downtime and improves efficiency within the service. There's also some potential opportunities around PV panels around that site, and looking to potentially move towards charging of those waste vehicles going forward. So in terms of next steps, obviously, public consultation is running till Friday the 14th of February, and we'll be really keen to get comments from Scrutiny Committee on these capital proposals. The Governance and Audit Committee is due to review the draft Treasury strategy on the 17th of February, and that incorporates the funding implications of some of these capital proposals. And obviously the final capital programme proposals will be informed by the final settlement, which we hope to receive on the 20th of February, feeding into that report on the 10th of March to Council. So those are the main points I was going to draw out. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
That's great. Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. I think you said my name, but like I said, I can't hear very much you're saying, unfortunately. I just want to check, Gemma, and maybe Colin can pick it up. At our last meeting, we talked about car parks. We also, I think Colin specifically referenced that there was going to be money in the budget for Bronagh Moor and Cliff Tops car park resurfacing. I just want to make sure that these are in there. I think it was irrespective as to whether there was going to be the charging regime put in. I think there was a commitment that those car parks be resurfaced, so I'd be interested in that. And I'm also interested to see whether, now we've got an MP driving around in a van looking at potholes, whether that's had any decrease likely in our capital budget for potholes.
Through you, Chair, if I could just respond initially to Councillor Hooper, and I'm sure Colin will come in to clarify. So I think we obviously potholes is a revenue cost firstly, so the capital cost for the council is around resurfacing the roads, and we've maintained the funding in the capital programme at around 2 million per annum. Colin did briefly refer to some potential additional funding from Welsh Government that we hope will be clarified as part of the final budget proposals, potential for some additional local government borrowing initiative funding for highways resurfacing, which would also help improve the situation. There is, of course, a revenue cost pressure that's been awarded in respect of potholes as part of the previous budget proposals. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. Colin.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I was just quick off the mark there.
Okay, no problem. I just asked Councillor Hooper if there's anything you wanted to come back on from Gemma's answer, but otherwise, yes, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm sorry for being too quick off the mark there. Yeah, I'd just like to go back to Councillor Hooper and confirm that the surfacing works at Bronimore Car Park and Clifftop are now part of the 2025 resurfacing programme, regardless of the outcome of the budget consultation and final decision. So that they're included in that programme, regardless now, as committed in the last special scrutiny meeting.
That's great. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? No. Okay. So don't see any hands then. So the recommendation that we've been asked then is that the report and appendices be referred to the Scrutiny Committee for consideration and debate, and that this will be passed to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee as the lead committee in order for their views to be forwarded to Cabinet. I'm happy to propose that. Is anyone happy to second?
Sorry, Chair. Can I just double check? Was there any specific comments to go back to CPR, or is committee happy to note? I just want to double check, that's all.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily pull any through, but I'll just double check with Councillor Hooper because his hand.
I was just going to second, Chair, if that's okay, second the notes in the report.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great. In that case, we will move on to agenda item 5. So we've got an update report on recycling and waste management service changes to 2024, which Colin is going to take us through. I hope.
Yes, definitely, Chair. Okay, can I call upon Gareth to put the slides up, please?
We're just setting it up now, Colin. Bear with us.
Okay, sure. Okay, thanks, Gareth. I think that's it. Great. Okay, so this update report will commence with the update for the Greenway subscription service. So last season, members probably are aware that it was our first full season, which commenced on the 1st of March 2004 and ends at the end of this month, 2025. It's still a 2-tier service, so and it's £36 for up to 8 bags and £54 for an unlimited service, so it's an unlimited collection. So that was the full cost. The first year we've rolled out the full service and the full cost for the year. And the service, obviously, the cost for last year was maintained for the year of the subscription service was introduced in July. And if members remember, it was a discounted price, but it was always based on the full price of £36 and £54. So up until the 31st of December 2024, we had 13,973 subscribers, and that's an increase of 1,338 subscriptions from the previous year. So the financial savings will exceed the £550,000 target it's likely to go just above £570,000, which is really positive. There remains a gap from being totally cost neutral, but there will always be a bit of a gap anyway. So there's around about a £300,000 gap from being completely cost neutral. But under the control waste regulations, we're unable to charge for the treatment of green waste, i.e. the composting element, because we're unable to do so as a public body. So there always will be a bit of a budget gap. So plan for this year, we're going to do some benchmarking. I'm not sure members remember when we first launched this service, we did a benchmarking exercise across Wales, and we took the average of Wales and reduced it under that bracket as the introduction for the service. But things have moved on. A lot of councils are starting to introduce the service. I think more than half, maybe 3/4 of councils across the country have introduced a subscription service. And there's varying rates across the service. So I guess they need to be incremental over a period of time. So we will work on some benchmarking and comparisons across Wales and councils, just so we can understand how much is the average rates across the country and how that has shifted to being cost neutral in other authorities. We have introduced technology to improve service delivery. So we started with paperwork, and of course now with 13,970 subscribers, that was proven to be very difficult. There wasn't an off-the-shelf technology that was suitable for this service, but we have kind of built a software system from a basic system that we package and kind of slightly tailored it in-house to suit the service. So that's working quite well. So that gives the crews the calls on a daily basis over the fortnight and prioritise and helps drive the routes for them. So we sure we don't waste any fuel, and it's the most efficient in terms of our carbon footprint. And just lastly, to finish off, it probably is important. It's a new service. The costs proposed are incremental over a period of time. So we make sure we get the pricing structure right and it's comparable and it's compliant, and we aim to be as cost neutral as possible for the longer term. Okay, so the income for the subscriptions for the last year equated to 503,694 exactly, and the additional £70,000 came from vehicle savings. Initially that was £140,000, but we just weren't able to capture that amount of savings because as the demand went up, so was the need for additional resources. So the green waste tonnage is still at consistent levels. If you look at the tables within the report over the period of time over the last few years, it is quite consistent, but it can be quite seasonal green waste, and it's difficult to predict. But we are very reliant on it towards our statutory recycling targets. So it's a really important area of business for us. And but the good news is the risks we identified in the report proposing this subscription service initially, and those risks to the organics inter-authority agreement, our contract with Cardiff to Welsh Water that run the organics contract, is still being avoided, which is a good thing. So we are well exceeding the minimum tonnage required per annum through the subscription service. So that's a very positive. What that means, just to explain that a little bit more in detail, is we would eventually, we could have been at a situation where we were paying for tonnage going in through the gate without actually bringing any green waste in. And that was a risk to start with. We thought we would largely avoid it, and thankfully, since we've introduced the garden waste subscription service, as I said, it has been avoided, and it's been quite consistent over a number of years. We're not dramatically losing tonnage. It'll only be for seasonal variations, so it's quite a positive. And obviously, that's bringing in as much as £570,000 of savings now, which is helping contribute and preventing other services being at detriment. So the service charges are out at the moment based on last year's prices. So you can still capture your subscription service at £36 for up to 8 bags and £54 for an unlimited service. And as I mentioned earlier in Gemma's slides, it's unlikely that we will achieve that £140,000 of saving, because purely it was a timing issue that we needed to get out the subscription service renewals at the end of January. So there was a clear period of time before the new service commences, and there's advantages during the months of February and March for our residents. It's a month where some of the normal bills, such as council tax and water rates and everything else, are not paid during those months. So it gives an opportunity for residents to capture their subscription service. And obviously, starting in March, it's important that we get these subscriptions in very early. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a black bag and household waste recycling centred update. So overall, residual waste, and I want to say residual waste, sorry, I don't always mean to use that term, I mean black bag waste, is in decline, and recycling tonnage is increasing. So that's happening year on year. So we're moving in the right direction. And our recycling officers continue to work in the community, and they obviously regulate the purple bag scheme that we offer out for support for large families who produce more waste, and for pets and hygiene waste. And that support is permanently ongoing. It's unreserved support. There should be nobody at detriment with their waste capacity. We will support anybody who legitimately has removed all the recycling from their black bags, and are recycling as much as possible, and what is left, the residual waste, we will always support to make sure there's appropriate capacity.
Sorry, Colin, can I just ask to put your volume up a bit? Some of the members think it sounds perhaps a little bit low when you're talking, so apologies for that, but if you could put it up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. How is that coming through now, Mark?
A little bit more, is that okay?
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, that sounds better now. Thanks, Colin.
Okay. If there's anything any members want me to recap over, I'll go back over them. That's no problem at all. So we are at the point 4. So there is a noted increase of waste at household waste recycling centres early in the financial year, and there was a need for a further intervention. So if you look at the graph contained within the report, we start the very early parts of the year, particularly the first 3 months, with high levels of residual waste. So that was quite concerning. We initially thought it was as a result of additional black bags being brought in, but surprisingly, it was actually down to our contractor using the residual waste skips because of problems with end markets with some recycling, which is probably something, now we've got very challenging recycling targets, is something we're going to have to address quite quickly, and over the next year work with that contractor. But the contract expires in 12 months' time, so there will be an opportunity to realign and change our targets. So when our existing contractor has problems finding an end market, and they're finding difficult materials to issue, and we've had that with mattresses, for an example, earlier this year. If they put it in the residual scape, what that ultimately means is that the tonnage comes onto our figures, which ultimately is adverse to our targets. And also we pay for the residual skip, and that is the only filler skip and material we pay for on those sites. It's excluded from the contract because it was necessary to ensure that waste didn't go to landfill, and it goes to our energy recovery facility, and we could control what happens with the residual waste. But there is a bit of a flaw in that. And sorry, can you go back on the slides? So there's a bit of a flaw in that. So it's something we will need to address with our contractors, who probably don't see the importance of recycling and our targets as much as we do. Likewise, this year, wood recycling was a major problem, and across authorities in Wales, that was having an adverse effect on statutory recycling targets and our performances, not unique to the Vale. So just to put this in perspective, and probably it's quite a surprise to, it'll probably be a surprise to members, that how wood features when we see just our normal material collected from the curbside. But wood recycling contributes significantly to statutory recycling targets. So we take from those household waste recycling centres, on average, between around 700 to 1,100 tonnes per month, every month, over the course of the year, and that wood recycling contributes massively to our statutory recycling targets, as I mentioned. So there's been a problem with wood recycling, and a lot of councils have been adversely affected. So where the end destinations have been challenging, and there hasn't been an option to take wood directly for recycling, it's gone to biomass, which has been which dramatically affects us. It's just like having additional residual waste. It's so adverse on our performance. But we've got over that. That was in our second quarter last year. Our first statutory recycling target performance in the first quarter was excellent, one of the best perform we've ever had. And then we dipped slightly in the second period because of the wood effects. But in the last quarter, in quarter 3, we had a really good quarter, one of our best again. So the performance been a little bit up and down, which is concerning. But we're not the only ones affected by wood recycling. That's been a problem with other authorities across Wales. As I mentioned earlier, mattresses, that's been challenging as well. And the recycling of mattresses has been difficult. And where that has affected our performance, that means the contractors have been putting some of that material in our skip for a short period, which ultimately we pick up the additional cost for and the adverse effects on our performance. We've had new legislation guidance received this year through Natural Resources Wales, and that relates to persistent organic pollutants known as POPs. So anything with a soft furnishing, so example would be a seating such as chairs, etc. So all the stuffing in those chairs are now subject to the POPs regulations, and that means it has to be transported to the energy recovery facility, and that's the only place it can go as an end destination to be burnt, and it has to travel separately on its own, so it doesn't affect any other material. So that's new guidance. We've had to meet the challenges, so we store it separately at the household waste recycling centres at the moment. But the same vehicle effectively takes it to the same destination, but separately in different containers. So, as I say, the concerns over recycling performance and use of residual skips at the household waste recycling centres, it is something that we're quite concerned on. And before our contract is due for renewal next April in 2026, we're going to do a revision, a review of the household waste recycling centre service. And if we suggest any changes, I guess that will be subject to a further report. Okay, thanks. Okay, so this is other recycling waste updates. So food waste tonnage continues to increase, so that's really positive because there are benefits of stripping out as much food waste as we can from the black bags, because we all know that has a detrimental effect in our communities where if it's not recycled properly, then we have the seagull vermin and effect, and the littering in our streets, and the black bags split open, which puts pressure on our cleansing standards and our response service for cleansing, and it means that other residents in the street has to put up with that litter and poor aesthetic look, I guess. So we are projecting from early 21-22 to this year an incremental increase of 2,000 tonnes of food waste, which is really, really good news. So the service continues to operate from the new RRF, the Resource Recovery Facility in Barry on Atlantic Trade Estate, our new facility. So we prepare most of all our dry recycling there for resale and reuse, as well as a small satellite station in Cowbridge that's still operating. And there are positive increases in dry recycling as well as that food waste. We've mostly phased out now all commingled recycling. We don't do any in our commercial service because of the new workplace recycling regulations, but we do have some small tonnage remaining from flats and apartments that are just too challenging to change to source separated or for contamination reasons. And the challenge of reducing black bag collections at flats and apartments remain, but we met the savings. So if you remember in the update report last year, we had an intention to bring flats and apartments in line with our curbside collections to reduce them to 3 weekly collections. But they're just so challenging. We're going to try again this year, have a new approach, speak to all our housing associations, our private landlords and our own housing department to see if we come up with a new strategy to help deal with that. But bin stores just continue to be so difficult to manage. Unfortunately, they're not our responsibility directly, but when it impacts in our environment, the local environmental quality, it's quite significant. And I know members have some members have seen the effects of the bin stores in their wards, and it's a difficult one to manage. So we met the £150,000 savings attributed to the service last year, but we just did it in a different way, and that challenge of reducing those frequency of collections at the flats and apartments continues, but we will try again this year with a new strategy. Our WEEE and batteries remain popular curbside service. So in the report, it details the tonnage we're collecting for the small electrical goods and the batteries, and seems to be quite consistent now over 2 years of data. So that's been really popular. We're operating, or we'll be launching, a soft plastics trial over the summer this year. So we were approached by RAP, the Welsh Government consultants. We were only 2 authorities that were approached, blueprint authorities, to see if we'd be willing to participate in the trial. So this is really good news. I think hopefully this will be the start of the reintroduction of soft plastics across the whole Vale. So they suggested to us the area of Penarth, and the reason they suggested Penarth because they can't, or they don't want a sample of more than 15,000 houses, and the area that we brought on phase 3 on the service changes for source separated recycling was around about exactly 15,000. So it's about communication of that messaging. So to do Barry, it was just too difficult. It's nearly twice that size, and we would have proportions of Barry on one scheme and another proportion on other schemes, and possibly other vehicles mixing those loads. Whereas in that area, and I think the RAP did that because they knew this, because they did our modelling. And down in the rural Vale at Cowbridge, we just wouldn't have the capacity, or we don't have a second baler to be able to manage the soft plastics. So hopefully that'll go really well. I know everybody's keen to get soft plastics back on as a collection. So how that would work, we would provide a single clear bag or white bag of some sort, single-use bag, and you would fill all your plastics, soft plastics, bread bags, crisp packets, etc., all into this bag, tie it up, and put it in the blue bag in your mixed plastics and cans bag. And as we empty that bag back at the plant, we'll go up the conveyor, and we would have staff on there taking off those single-use bags and then drop them into the chutes, into the bins, and then we will bale it directly on our sites, and then we will go to a specialist plant. And the trial is to see whether how the contamination looks and whether we can actually achieve good recycling rates sustainably here in Wales or the UK for soft plastics. And Welsh Government are supporting a new plastics plant down in Swansea, and hopefully one day they may be able to take that waste and recycle it here in Wales. So other additions for considerations, we could look, or we're hopefully going to look at introducing textile collections at curbsides. So that would bring quite a suite of recycling materials collected that are, now we've brought on the WEEE and batteries, and we have all the dry recycling and the food waste, etc. So that really would complement all the services that we do provide at the curbside. And this is going to be quite an important one going forward, because it will reduce the waste within the black bag. And I think probably the only other item we'd have left really, which is quite a considerable weight, is nappies or AHP hygiene waste. But the most important part of the textiles, it will contribute to the emissions that we will be taxed on in time of fossil-derived CO2 from energy recovery facility, from our energy recovery facility. So what that means is, when there's a carbon tax introduced, and I'll explain what that means shortly in the later slides, we will have to reduce the amount of plastics we have to reduce that amount of CO2 emissions, and that's how we'll be taxed. And those emissions will come from plastics. So not just the plastics we put in your blue bag, but the second biggest contributor is textiles and the plastic that's used in manufacturing of those textiles. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I included this in the report last year, but this is still our latest compositional analysis of the black bag. So this is how we're going to target going forward, and the work of our recycling officers on street. So it's just a recap, and you'll see there's still 13% of recycling still included within the bag, but the highest contributor is still food waste at 16%. Although food waste tonnage is increasing, which is positive, food waste is still the biggest offender, and of course that has the impact on our local environmental quality, particularly when those bags, food waste is included with those bags, and the vermin, the gulls, etc. targeted. Okay, next slide please. So this is a legislative update. So where we are and where we're going for waste for the very near future. We do have a blueprint review in 2025. It's something Welsh Government have been working on for some time. So the blueprint is guidance on how we can most sustainably collect our recycling. So the new service that we operate at the curbside, collecting separately 3 weekly black bags, food waste to anaerobic digestion, composting the green waste, and all the extras we've added on, such as the weed, the batteries, etc., is what is known as the blueprint. So the blueprint has been updated, and there will be some additionals added to it to put more focus on elements of what's in the black bag, or those wastes that are not treated as sustainably as they could be. So there will be some changes needed at the household waste recycling centres. As I mentioned earlier, there are some concerns that we're not capturing and treating as much black bag waste as we could, and our target, to put this into perspective, our target in our contract is 72%, which we largely make, but in the blueprint review it's they're suggesting an 85% target, recycling target at household waste recycling centres, as well as looking at that nappy, hygiene waste, etc. But I don't not really worry too much about what's contained within the blueprint review. Because we've largely made most of our services changes over the last 6-7 years now, building infrastructure and introducing those service changes at the curbside. So we're largely ahead of the game. We have the extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging waste. So this is based on the polluter pays principle. So any packaging waste that the items we buy, or transporting the items to retailers or supermarkets, etc., the people who manufacture them will be made responsible for dealing with the end costs of recycling and managing that waste. So you may have noted earlier that I mentioned there was £400,000 attributed to this EPR money that we're banking on receiving later on in this year. So that was from this scheme, and that's money that will be paid to us from UK Treasury and to all councils across the country, which will be funded by the people who manufacture this waste. So hopefully it will focus their minds that over later years to come, that manufacturers will reduce the amount of packaging that they produce. And you might have already seen packaging change when you're buying products, and you'll see that they are getting smaller. And that's not necessarily mean that the product's getting less, it just means the packaging is reducing, and the amount of packaging, because there will be this EPR scheme introduced that makes the manufacturers pay for it. The deposit return scheme is going to be now a Wales only scheme. So there was a scheme proposed for this year, postponed from last year, that was England and Wales, and that was kind of proposed through reverse vending for drinks bottles and cans at retail premises. But it was a bit of a slow uptake on this, and it was already postponed a number of times. So Wales have now decided, the Welsh Government, to go alone and have their own scheme for Wales. So that's still pending. And then we got the Environmental Protection, the Single-Use Plastics Products Wales Act. The first phase was introduced in 2023. That you'll probably note if you ever go out and pick up kind of takeaway waste or things, the cartons you're buying from, the polystyrene has disappeared, and there's now biodegradable products. And it's difficult to get hold of plastic knives and forks, etc. And that's because of all the Single-Use Plastic Products Act that was introduced. And the second phase is due in a year's time, in the spring, and that will deal with other items of single-use plastic and carrier bags, etc. The recycling and work regulations were introduced last April 2024, and all commercial commingled services have now been withdrawn. So we don't provide any commingled services to any commercial operator. It's actually illegal to do so anymore. So like we separate all our waste at home and recycling, ready for collection, so do businesses have to do that now as well. And lastly, and not least, this is the UK Emissions Trading Scheme. It's proposed for 2028, still a few years away yet. So this is for emissions of fossil-derived CO2 from combustible waste, i.e. our energy recovery facility where we take our black bags. So there'll be a priority on reducing plastics and possibly textile recycling. I think the only concern for us really is how they do the compositional analysis of the black bags. So there's quite a number of authorities that use the energy recovery facility at Viridor at Trident Park in Cardiff, and it's how that the concern would be that we were doing everything we can to reduce the contents of black bag and capture really high levels of recycling. And if we reduce that plastics and textiles and what's in that black bag to reduce the carbon, the potential output is how does a non-performing council, how is their waste going to be analysed compared to ours? So that's just something that we're working on with our contract management team, who manage the project with partnership. So that's something to look out for. There is potential to be quite challenging. So if we took the composition of our black bags from a couple of years ago, when we first looked at this scheme, and when it was potentially 5 years away, we could be looking at potentially a £500,000 carbon tax on all black bag waste we take into energy recovery. So we are constantly working with our project management team, and we are looking at this legislation closely and how it will adversely affect us, and whether some of the EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme funding that we should get later this year, how that can be used to offset the carbon tax that we'll no doubt face. And it just puts into perspective how much we need to still reduce our black bag waste. So we will have to achieve that over the years to come, which will be challenging on its own. Okay, next slide, please. So as an infrastructure update, the resource recovery facility on Atlantic Trading Estate has been operational now for just about 2 years. So that separates it. That sort of separated income that we have there and our Cowbridge facility. So everything we're preparing in-house now for resale and reuse is really high quality because we collect it separately. And this year we're projected to bring in £1.4 million of income from dry recycling sales. So that continues to perform really well. The difficulty with that is we are likely to see that value drop to probably be around £1 million next year and years to come because of the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme. Most likely will have an adverse effect on market values. But if you look at how we're going to get money back from the Treasury across the UK, hopefully as the materials dip in value, we'll get back from the producers. So hopefully one will cancel each other out at least, and there should be a sufficient funding to introduce soft plastic collections across the whole Vale, as long as they are successful. So Vale Reuse Shop, that's been opened just over a year or so now. It's managed by Enfys Foundation, so that's a registered charity linked to our household waste recycling centre contractors. Open Tuesday to Sunday, and to date they've sold 19,899 items and over 85 tonnes of items reused and 272 kilos of items reused every day. So that's been a really big bonus for us and performance over the last year, because our reuse figures prior to the reuse shop opening were really, really poor. So Atlantic Trade Estate Fleet Parking, as Gemma mentioned, touched on this in the capital programme, is proposed to be included in the capital programme for 25-26. This is quite an important project for us to get over the line, particularly as we're facing really challenging budgets for the next few years. So this will provide savings that will pay for itself, and it will lower our carbon footprint, and it'll give us operating options that we don't have at the moment. So for an example, when our vehicles go to the site at the moment from after lunch onwards, they will discharge their second loads, and there may not be enough time or capacity to go back onto the streets collecting more recycling. Sometimes there's a bit of reluctance to work on in teams, and all of those vehicles go in convoy back up to Wenvo to ensure they get there appropriately in times for finishing times. Whereas if we had the fleet parking on the same site, we could effectively keep those vehicles on the road till virtually finishing time. We could look at 9.25 hour days, and then we could even bring the vehicles back full and just do a shuttle service across the road every evening, unloading and preparing those vehicles for the staff to come in the next day so they can start again. And it keeps the operators on the curbside operating longer hours, collecting rather than travelling. So that will be really positive. And as Gemma mentioned earlier, there's options for PV panels. So we are exploring using the large barn roofs for solar to power the equipment that we have in the barns. But at later dates, if we build that fleet park, and we can take that power we generate off the PV panels across the road to power EV vehicles. Hopefully in the long term, we'll change all our fleet to EV. And then we can use some of that solar power we captured off the roofs to power the vehicles. So we become quite sustainable on the site overall with the household waste recycling centre, the new plant, and our park and the fleet there. And it'll provide us with efficiencies on the ground as collections as well. So a really important project for us as a team. And lastly, Landau Household Waste Recycling Centre. The road was upgraded last year, which was quite pleasing, but we got further work planned for this year, improving signage and adding CCTV to help with fly tipping, etc. Okay, next slide, please. So our key targets for 2025, this is our most important year that we've ever had. So highlighted in red, this year is our new recycling target of 70%. Is the highest target that that's been set, and all the work we've been doing over 10-15 years has been leading up to this specific year, and is not without challenge. So I would imagine, I'll stick my neck out here, probably at least half, maybe 3/4 of council in Wales will fail this target. It will be very challenging. We have hit 70% many times over the last few years, but other than last year, the year before, we dipped down to 67%. But we've done everything we can over the last 12 months to ensure we try to meet this target. What's helped us is that blip with the wood recycling that was really difficult, and mattresses that went into the residual waste. But we've also diverted street cleansing waste, and we're splitting those bags, removing recycling. So we're trying to capture as much as possible, and we've done similar measures of that across the service to try and ensure that we are one of the few authorities that achieve this target. And hopefully, in another month or so, when we complete this financial year, we will be one of those councils who successfully reach 70%. And retain and be still one of the highest performing councils in Wales. And then by 2030, we've got to move from 26 to 33% reduction in waste, and then 60% reduction in avoidable food waste, which I think will be largely on target to achieve. And then by 2050, one planet resource, 62% reduction in waste, zero waste in its entirety, and zero carbon. So at the moment, leading up to this target, we were using the resources of 3 planets in Wales. If we do all the measures for the 2025 target, then we should be reduced to 2 planets. And then by 2050, if all of these measures are implemented and we continue on this journey, only then will Wales be using natural resources of 1 planet. Okay, next slide, please. And that brings us to the end of the presentation, Chair.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. Mark, I've switched to headphones. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's coming through great. Thanks, Chair.
All right, fab. Thank you. And does anyone have any questions or comments for Colin? Councillor Hooper?
Thanks, Chair. I can hear you, so that's a good start. It's just a brief one. It's the very start of your presentation, Colin. I'm just interested in how the numbers have changed in terms of people using the green waste collection. So we've got just under a quarter using us now. What was it like before when it was included in the council tax? Thank you.
That is a really good question, and I don't think we'll be able to answer that because we never measured how many people put out green bags. So we only measure it now because we've got the number of subscribers, but previously we didn't really know, to be honest. Some people participated in the scheme, some people didn't, some people don't produce green waste, but we travel past their houses anyway. So unfortunately, we won't have that data. The only data we do have is the amount of tonnages of green waste we produce, which is largely consistent over the last 3 or 4 years. But what I guess the measure we don't know is there are some residents who probably have done some home composting, or may have taken their waste directly to the household waste recycling centre. But if you look at generally over the last 3 or 4 years, it seems to be running quite consistent. I'm sorry, we don't have that exact data, Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Colin. Councillor Hooper, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thanks for that, Colin. I understand that it's more difficult to get. Sorry, Chair, there was just a second point as well, which I was meaning to raise, and it's just the point about wood. And I just wonder whether Colin's got a view as to whether or not we're seeing wood being recycled in the way that it is, because people are using it in their homes more because the cost of heating their homes is so much more higher than it was. And could that perhaps having a worse effect on us, because burning wood in wood burners is obviously contributes particles into the atmosphere, etc., etc. Be interested in his view. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Did you want to come back in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So yeah, it's a really good question, Councillor Hooper. I don't think it's related, because the use of wood fuel at home is generally a different type of wood that we're getting at the household waste recycling centres. Most of the wood we get is DIY type of wood, or it could be furniture, it could be building type material, laminated floors, etc. That sort of wood, which is generally different to the types of wood you would use in a wood burner. I think the wood has always been quite a high tonnage at the sites. We've always attracted quite high levels. But I guess DIY projects are more popular than ever, and it just seems to an area of increased over the years, really. I don't think there is any scientific answer behind it, but we are largely dependent and reliant on that. But if Welsh Government later changed the targets so they're not tonnage focused, they may end up being more carbon focused. So that might change the dynamics of how we record and achieve our statutory recycling targets.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Colin, and again for a very comprehensive presentation, which was really interesting. I just wanted to ask a few more questions, if I may, about the relationship and the contractor and their responsibility for the recycling markets. I share your concern. If and how this works, some of our recycled product doesn't have a value great enough for them to do something with, so it's going in residual skips. That is a concern. So I really do appreciate the work you're going to do to investigate that more. But can you tell us a little bit more about exactly what they do as far as their responsibility with the recycling markets and how that works? So basically where all our recycling goes, if there is a good price for it, and if we as a council earn any money through that particular part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. So we have an all-inclusive management rate as part of our contract arrangement with our contractor. So they charge us a management rate, which is inclusive of their management, staff, machinery, etc. And they have the income or costs associated with the recycling. So we know where the recycling is going. They have to provide us, under the environmental permit and the transfer of waste, they have to provide us with every end destination, and they have targets to meet within the contract. So they have to achieve a minimum 72% recycling rate, and everything they produce is reported to NRW in the transfer, and it has to be sustainably done in this country, in Wales or the UK, wherever possible. So they have we have targets they have to meet under the contract. But we have found or established, particularly when we're looking a bit more closely into their activities, that should there something be adverse within the markets, then they tend to use a residual skip rather than going that extra mile to ensure that the product is recycling. And it's been a cause for concern, particularly in the last year, that we've really scrutinised every activity, because we know how important achieving the 70% recycling rate. So I think, the next steps for us is to look more closely at where those materials are going, see if we could get better markets and what those markets will look like. And we can do that through Welsh Government and share the knowledge with all the other councils in Wales who do in-house services. And we could maybe project how much that would actually cost to deliver that service, as opposed to paying the management fee. And we could do a bit of an analysis of that service and see whether we're capturing good value and whether we could do it more sustainably if we did it in a different way. So yeah, I think probably that's going to be a future report of some sort, and to Cabinet with some recommendations, and probably a referral to this committee so we can have a look a bit more closely.
Thanks, Colin. Councillor Brother, did you want to come back in? Councillor Brother?
Sorry, that's my bad. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I was in full flow there, Chair. Yes, really, really pleased to hear that piece of work's going to happen, Colin, and I think it's quite important, and certainly to link in with the other local authorities, being more circular and making sure that what we recycle has another life and can be reused and remanufactured. I think, as you say, is a real responsibility on us. And I think just to hear that you care and we care as an authority is such good news. And I'm looking forward to seeing this report in the future. So carry on the good work. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Drake.
This is a quick one for Colin, and I could well have missed what you said in your report, but I just wanted to know, have you had any issues with fires from disposable vapes recently?
No, nothing reported, Councillor Drake. I guess our biggest concern is not such the vapes, but it's some of the batteries that slip through the stream. So where we get batteries from power tools, etc., people are putting them in their waste, or they're putting them in their battery bag, and they should be deposited at the household waste recycling centre. They're the ones we have the greatest risk. I would hope that the work Welsh Government is doing to ban vapes, particularly disposal vapes, will help us not only with the amount of vapes in circulation and come through the waste stream, but also street littered as well, and that would be most welcome by us, to be honest.
Yeah, yes, I totally agree with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. I'm bringing the Cabinet Member, Councillor Wilson.
I think you muted, Councillor.
On mute, Mark.
I just realised. Can I thank Colin for your brilliant presentation? That's superb. You covered most of the areas. One or two extra things that I think we do need to look at, though. And I think Councillor Brother made it about the circular economy. I think this is absolutely vital. And I think it's very important that we try and reuse things as many as possible. And one of the things that we do have in the Vale, Glamorgan, in fact, many parts of Wales, are what we call repair shops. And I urge people, these are funded by Welsh Government indirectly. And nevertheless, people can go there to get things repaired, and hopefully then can reuse them afterwards, as opposed to throwing them away. I think that's vital. And also the other thing that we got, obviously, in the Atlantic trading store is our shop, our reuse shop, and clearly, you know, organised by the Emphas Foundation, it's clearly a good thing, and I'm very keen if we can have the resources and the money to look at other places to put them as well, because I think clearly that's the way forward. That is something that we should be doing and continue to do. And I think clearly, you know, it's all part of our targets to reduce the amount of resources that we have. And we've got to keep using renewable. As you can see, 2050 for some people is a target not that far away. It's only 25 years' time. And really, to go for zero waste, a one planet philosophy means we basically use everything and we don't overuse our resources. And I think that's absolutely clear because we want to have future generations. And I think it's absolutely vital that we all aim to do that. And the targets of 7%, I believe, are achievable this year. Obviously, certain things will go for us, like the climate sometimes will go for us, and sometimes we'll find it difficult. But clearly, you know, there are things that we've done, like the Garden Waste Initiative, which I think has generated quite a lot of income for the authority. That's had a big beneficial impact upon our budget. But obviously, there are still challenges ahead, you know. So, you know, I keep an ongoing look at this all the time, my officers. But I would like to thank Colin and his team in particular. I know it's just not Colin. There's many other people behind the scenes who are working really hard. And I love going to our fantastic plant at Atlantic Trading Estate because it's absolutely amazing. And it's, to me, it's so efficient and it's also so well looked after and cared for. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I don't see any other hands, and this report was just brought to us for noting, so I'm happy to propose that we note, so if anyone would be happy to second. Please.
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. In that case, so item 6 is any other urgent matters, and I don't have any. So I think that concludes our business for this evening. So all I have to do is remind everybody that our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, the 11th of March at 6 p.m. Thank you everyone who's joined us this evening online and watching on the live stream, and I will see you all at the next meeting.